Daily Rambam for Wednesday, Chav Zayin El Tav Shem Pei, Perek Shvi, the 7th Perek of Hilchos Tefilah Berachas Kohanim. So after we learned all kinds of dinim that are related to how to daven properly, Hilchos, so now we're moving on to discuss many other additional smaller tefillahs that appear in our Siddur that aren't included in the category of Kriya Shema or Berachas Kriya Shema or Shemina Esrei and Nefilas Apayim, as we shall see. The Rambam begins Perek Shvi Alach Aleph. So when Chachamim came up with the nusach of Shemina Esrei, as we described a long time ago, many prakim ago, tiknu brachas acheres lavarach esim b'chol yom. So along with that, they also were metaken additional brachas. Earlier in Perek Aleph, we quoted Chazal, Anshik Nesas Agdela tiknu hem Yisrael, brachas, tefillas, kedushas, v'havdalas. So it's one big package. So we're moving on now to those additional brachas, whose source is also in Chazal and maybe even before period that we call Chazal, the Chachamim, in the early Bayit Sheni. So let's see. When the person enters his bed to go to sleep, so the Rambam starts the Seder here from Amayrav. See also above in Perek Aleph, the Rambam said, Nimtzu at Tfilas b'chol yom shalish arvis v'shachris v'mincha. The Rambam Seder starts from arvis, and we quoted a beer from the Rabbi, from the Sichos Chelek Lamed Hey, about the Seder of the order, but we're going with nighttime first. So Mevarech, so when he goes into bed to go to sleep, he makes the following bracha, and this is the nusach of the Rambam. Baruch atah Hashem l'kinu melech ha'olam, hamapu chev l'sheina alinai, umer li yishem masoyin. So we're thanking Hashem for putting us to sleep, and for, I guess, mer li yishem masoyin means give light in our eyes. So I guess maybe that means waking up. Yiratzon v'nach Hashem alekai, shtatzilena me'yitzara, mi-pegara, save me from bad things. Al yivaluni chalem me'yitzarayim, lo yehurim rayim, and I shouldn't be bothered by bad thoughts and dreams. Atiyah mitasi shleim lefanecha. My bed should be perfect for you. I should get up in one piece. Please make sure I wake up in the morning. That's the nusach of the Rambam, as it is in the Kisvei Yad. And then the Rambam says, and you read the first parsha of Shema v'Hafta, and that's it. You go to sleep. So notice that what the Rambam is saying here is basically, instead of the whole Seder Kriya Shema Shalamita that we're familiar with today, according to the Rambam, the Seder is very simple. You make the bracha Amapel, and then you say Shema v'Hafta, and that's it.
This previous bracha of the Rambam, is anybody saying it? Or it's
in the Seder. We say Amapel at the end of Kriya Shema. Like we say it a little differently, but
it's a little.
It's in the Siddur. And you look right in the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch and the Mechaber and Siman Reish Lamed Tes, so there already you see additional Haisafis, although it's still different than our Seder. And you look in Shara Kail of the Rebbe Zayd, the Perek Lamed Vav, you'll see how he explains and presents the Seder Kriya Shema Shalamita as we're familiar with it. Now, also interestingly, the Rambam seems to be saying that first you make the bracha, Amapil, and then you say Shema. Look in Gemara Berachos, it says, Hanichnas lishan al mitasei, you go to sleep, Omer mishma Yisrael v'ad v'hoyim shemaya, v'omer baruch hamapu chev l'sheina. So the Gemara sounds like similar to ours Seder. Obviously ours is a bit more prolonged, but the format being Shema, then Amapil. And the other Rambam is saying for Keret, so first we'll talk about it. Did he have a different Girsa or whatever? And the Yishon, you go to sleep. Now, most prints have an additional line here. Even if his wife is in the same bed, you can still say the psukim. We learned earlier already the dinim of being in the same bed and saying holy things. But anyway, it's not in the apparently not in the Nusach Tzav Yad Rambam. The iman osasu sheina, and if sleep seems to be overcoming him. So kaide afilu pasuk rishon psukim rachmim. So you can say either just the first pasuk Shema and that's it, or other psukim of rachmim. And then you go to sleep. So it's interesting that the Rambam is framing it that way, that you say the first pasuk or the psukim of Rachmim if you're falling asleep. If you look in the Gemara, it says that if you're a Talmid Chacham, then you don't have to say Shema. You don't need that protection. And Abaye said even a Talmid Chacham should say at least one psuk of the Rachmi, like Biyad Chaf Kedruchi. That's where the association of the pasuk with going to sleep. We also say Biyad Chaf Kedruchi. We say a lot of things. The Rambam turns it from a Talmid Chacham, instead of talking about a Talmid Chacham, the Rambam frames it as you're falling asleep very fast, and the way he presents it is either the first pasuk or Psukei Rachmim. And the Mefarshim talk about where did the Rambam, how's the Rambam getting it the way he's presenting it here. Also in Gemara Shavuos, you have additional things, Yeshe B'Seiser Elyon, and the Rambam seemingly does not mention that at all. Although we do say Yeshe B'Seiser Elyon, and not the other thing that the Gemara mentions. Moving on to getting up in the morning. And now we're going to go through the whole Birchas HaShachar over the course of a number of halachas. So I think I'm going to first try to go through most of the halachas, and then I'll quote a bit from the Kesef Mishnah, and then I'll quote a bit from the Alter Rebbe, time allowing. Halacha Gimel, B'shah she'yikatz b'seif shnasa, when you get up at the end of your sleep, and the Rambam's being a diaker, dafka at the end of your sleep, not in the middle of the night if you just happen to wake up. Varech v'hol mitase kach. So while you're still on your bed, this is the first thing you say. Lekai, of course, Maidani didn't exist for many hundreds of years till afterwards. So the first thing you say is Lekai. And this is the Rambam's Gersa on the Neshama Shenasat to be Tahira, to Varasav, to Yitzar, to Nafachti, to Mishama Bekirbi. We're thanking Hashem for the Neshama. You're going to take it away from me. Then there'll be Tchias HaMesam. Here's another source, technically, in the Rambam for Tchias HaMesam. As long as I have the Neshama, I'm thanking you, Hashem. Returning the souls to the bodies that are practically dead. Unless it's referring to Tchias HaMesam, not clear. I didn't look into it, whether it's just referring to waking up in the morning, we're calling the body then Pegar HaMesam, or somehow we're talking about Tchias HaMesam in general. But either way, this is the bracha, that the first bracha you say right when you wake up, as soon as you open your eyes, according to the Rambam. And of course, Chassidus has many pirushim, and many of these brachas, we're not going to have time to mention it. The halacha daled, Keshemea Krel HaTarnagel, when you hear the sound of the rooster, the so presumably the sachvi here is referring to the rooster. The different taichin in the word sachvi, but we'll go with that taich over here. So that's that bracha, and then I'm just going to rattle off the brachas in order of how the person is beginning his day. So first you wake up, then you hear the rooster, then you get dressed, then when you cover your head, Mevarech, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, Eiter Yisrael b'sefaros. So Eiter Yisrael b'sefaros is referring to the idea that we cover our heads. Shema v'yodav aleinov, when the
Rambam's opinion is these brachas have an actual function.
Yes, the Rambam is going to.
By us, we're just saying them.
Yeah, the Rambam is going to target, mention those who do it differently. I'm going to mention from the Alter Rebbe. So the Rambam, it's very specific. It's a routine. You're going through the steps of your routine, and at each step you make the appropriate bracha. When you put your hands over your eyes, to rub your eyes a bit as you're waking up. When you sit up, so presumably you were getting dressed before you sat up. So it's like you were sort of rooted to your bed, and now you're free. You're getting up. So you're thanking Hashem for that. You put your feet down on the ground. You're thanking Hashem for earth, concept of dry land. When you stand up, means you put your feet down before you stood up. Then when you actually stand up, you're able to stand upright. Then when you wash your hands, according to Ram, this is the order. And here you see the Ram writes specifically because this is Birchas HaMitzvahs, so you want to make the bracha before you do the mitzvah. So I thought this was following the manuscripts, but I didn't have a chance to look into this every shinui and every gersa. Okay. At any rate, Ksherech Panav washes his face. So we're thanking Hashem again for the eyes, different than the Keachivrim. And then you have this Yihiratzen, Yiratzen Fanecha, and of course you have, I think Taisa say you should say Vihiratzen. Here it says Yihiratzen. And I believe this is counted as two separate brachas. Amav Rishena is one thing, and Koim Chasam Tovim at the end is another thing. Should be on the right track today. Just a general prayer to have a successful day between you and God, between you and other people socially.
The only reason the Alter Rebbe counts is that it can't be must because the father.
Yeah, right. So that's
connected.
So there's a discussion about that.
The Rambam doesn't have the father.
Right. That's what I mentioned. Baruch Atah Hashem, Goyim L'Chasan Tayim, thanking Hashem for treating us well, for being kind to us. The Rambam goes on halacha. Hey, this is all one long hamshich, so I'm going through all. And whenever a person this is part of the routine, but it's also a general thing. It's not just everything else is once in the morning. This is part of the morning routine, but it's also always. Whenever you go into the Beis HaKisei, before you go in, you say the following. It's not a bracha, it's just a statement. So you're sort of apologizing to the malachim that are accompanying you, that you leave them, you should just sort of wait for you outside, and you're going in. It's the human way. You got to go to the bathroom. When you come out, you make the following bracha. So add this bracha to the list. You're thanking Hashem for the body. This is the Rambam's nusach. So you really you need the body to work exactly the way it's set up. So that's that. Then we still didn't finish. Now when you put on your belt, so this is apparently a much later step. In the beginning, you got dressed and you put the sodin al reishay and you got up, you started walking around. Now comes these additional things. You add the overgarments. You put on the belt. So it's a bracha referring to that Hashem girds us with strength. When you put your shoes on, called tzrachai. That's the way they're menaked over here. They're menaked at tzrachai. I didn't have a chance to look into the details of the nusach of tzarki or tzrachai. Yeah. True. I'm just following the text I have in front of me, but yeah, I'm aware there's a discussion about it, and the way they were menaked here was tzrachai. So the shoes apparently something you only really put on when you're heading out the door, and now as you're heading out the door, so you're thanking Hashem for directing your footsteps throughout the day. And then there's an additional three that aren't tied to any particular action. And every day, at this point, you make the following three brachas. Thanking Hashem for not making you a Gentile, a slave, or a woman. Halacha Zayin Shmona Aser Brachas Elu. These 18 Ein Lahem Seder. There's no real order. We presented an order here, a plausible order of a routine, but there's actually no ingrained seder. You make the appropriate bracha whenever it fits with whatever you're doing. So, for example, let's say you put your belt on while you're still on your bed, even though in the routine we added at the end. So say it then. If you heard the rooster afterwards, so you see clearly that Rambam holds you actually have to hear the rooster. And you make that bracha then. And if somehow you skipped something, it didn't happen, then you don't make the bracha. According to the Rambam. So Ketzad, some examples of when you wouldn't make the bracha. If you were sleeping in your clothing, so you should make the bracha, thanking Hashem for dressing you if you're already dressed. What if you decided to head out that day barefoot? Whatever the guy says, you don't make that bracha. So interestingly, the Rambam doesn't mention, we don't say Shas Likol Tzarki and Yom Kippur Matisha because we're not wearing leather shoes. Interestingly, the Rambam just says Halach Yachiv as a general statement, and for Yom Kippur Matisha, he talks about the Rechitza, which is actually something that we do say. You don't wash on Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av. So you can't make the bracha on washing your hands. You make the bracha for washing your eyes. If you didn't enter the bathroom, I think that's the one thing we probably would be makbid on. Besides on until Yadayim, of course, you shouldn't be making the brachas until you wash. But if for some reason the person that goes to the bathroom might be the one bracha we don't say right away. Halacha Tes. Nagu ha'am b'revareinu levarech brachas elu kulan zoach l'zibu beis hakneses. The Rambam attests, though, that what he's saying is at odds with the common practice, even in, he says, most of our cities, meaning the cities that he was in himself, the custom already was to say all the brachas one after another in shul, bein eschayvu ben, bein eschayvu ben, whether it fit their routine that morning or not. The Rambam says, v'tosi, it's a mistake. When you should not do this. You should not make a bracha unless you actually were obligated to say it. So now to comment a bit on various points that came up here. So right off the bat, the Kesef Mishnah quotes Rabbeinu Yoina. So the order of the Rambam, he says, from the beginning, Tal HaMeichem Mitzadei Gover fits with the order in the Gemara. Rabbi Yehuda said that it sounds like from the Rambam that you're saying you're already starting to say them on your bed as you woke up before Netilas Yadayim. How can that be if your hands are unclean? How are you going to make brachas? So, what about the Gemara? In the Gemara, it's in this order. He says, "They were Hayukadashim." So it sounds like he's suggesting that the practice of Negelvas is actually very ancient. Today, usually we think we attribute Negelvas more to the Zohar, but the Rebbe seems to be saying that at the time of Chazal, they're able to say the brachas on their bed b'nekiyos. But we're not that clean, not clear 100%. I didn't have a chance to look into the Rabbi Yehuda, but what the scenario is, why they were clean or were not. But that's what he says. So therefore, he disagrees with the Rambam's whole system of saying it in bed. What about saying all the brachas before you do them? So he said if the Rambam mentions Tefilah specifically for Netilas Yadayim or not, but it sounds like the whole point is that you're saying the bracha for each step. So isn't that similar to the idea of Kol HaBrachas Mivarach Hayis Amayver L'Asiyasan? You make the bracha before you do the thing that you're making the bracha for? He says, no, that's Berachas HaMitzvahs. If you're actually doing a mitzvah, so then you have to say the Berachas HaMitzvah before the mitzvah. But Tzivanu, you're talking about the specific thing. But thanking Hashem in general for different things, you wouldn't need to do it right away. Wouldn't be a problem. So Rabbi Yehuda is already chipping at it from that angle. Rambam said that he has a problem with him saying it in the wrong, saying ones that they weren't neschayev in. But Rabbi Yehuda is saying, be neschayev, but you should just say it later, not as you're going along. Then there's what about the rooster? Do you actually have to hear a rooster? So he quotes Taisvis, Gasmisha quotes a Taisvis that says that you don't have to hear the actual rooster. It's you're thanking Hashem for the light. You wake up in the morning, there's light in the morning, so the rooster is the one who sees the light first. That's why the rooster crows in the morning. But as long as you sing the light, it's fine. You don't have to hear an actual rooster. However, Taisvis agrees that all the other brachas you actually have to actually do that particular thing in order to make the bracha. And the question is, what if you're blind? Chas v'shalom, should you say the chivrim, things like that. Regarding Yom Kippur, so the Rambam said on Yom Kippur, specifically, you don't make the brachas for washing your hands or cleaning your eyes, washing your eyes. So the Rabbi takes issue with the Rambam, and he says, who is he who's not going to wash your hands even on those days for cleanliness or for ruach ra? And he mentions this idea that you can use wet kalim, it's a wet cloth or something, and you can use that to clean your face. So that would be for Hamaver Shena, you're still wiping and cleaning your face, even if you're not splashing water on it. The Kesef Mishnah says that I don't know, it seemed to be, it wasn't clear what the Rabbi, he says the Rabbi is just disagreeing about this point, about whether this is rechitza or not. The Rambam said there's no rechitza. The Rabbi said there is a form of rechitza, and he says the Rambam must hold, even if the Rambam doesn't disagree per se. The Rambam might just say that's not a form of rechitza that requires a bracha. There has to be a certain level of rechitza. And then he quotes the Ran. The Ran says he disagrees with the Rambam, and Tisha B'Av Yom Kippur, you do have to wash your hands. Rechitza the mitzvah muteres, Netilas Yadayim the Tefilah mitzvahi. You can even walk through a river to meet your Rebbe. You can get completely wet for a mitzvah. So for sure, for the Shechina, you should be able to wash your hands. It says the wet cloth was just for your face, Taka. For your face, it makes sense to use the wet cloth, but you have to wash your hands. And it sounds like from the Rambam, you don't wash your hands on Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av, and he's mitzayin to look in Hilchos Yom He says Aser, etc. And the Garnik Halacha Tes, where the Rambam says it's a mistake, what everyone's doing. So the Kesef Mishnah says that's not just a problem that they do it whether they're nischayev or not. He says the Rambam also has a problem with the fact that they're saying it afterwards. And according to the Rambam, you have to say it at the appropriate time. If you missed your chance, maybe according to the Rambam, it would also be too late. Even though I don't see that in the words of the Rambam, he describes what they do, but his comment on what's wrong just seems to be focusing on that they're making brachas, they're not mechayim. Now, if you look in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch Sim involved, so there are a lot of additional details. Alter Rebbe starts off talking about Berachas HaShachar, it's the Seder HaOlam, everything that we enjoy every day, all the basic enjoyments of life, that you're able to stand up, wake up in the morning, so you thank Hashem for the first time for that Hana, and that covers the entire day. It's like a Berachas Hana, almost like a Berachas Hanenin, that, I don't know if you sing it's Mamash a Berachas Hanenin, but it's related to things that we enjoy, and you're making a bracha sort of for the whole day, the first time you enjoy that particular thing. And Alter Rebbe adds, it's lahashlim minyan amei brachas, that almost as if like it was part of the deliberate kavanah was to make it possible to have 100 brachas every day. And then the Alter Rebbe launches into discussing the concept of amei brachas. Then Rambam mentions it later on in Halacha Yudalad, and I'll mention what, if I have the time, I'll mention the Rabbi actually mentioned it a bit in the later years. Alter Rebbe goes on, talks about each of the brachas. He goes through each one and explains it. I don't know if it's 100%. And regarding Shasli Kotsarki, so there's no Nekudas in Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch either. But so Alter Rebbe says, "Ve'en l'shanis anusaf haleimar tzrachai akaf bekametz shulashin rabim b'nei shebracha zu einai ela al neilas min olam shu tzayrach adam." Tzrachai implies all kinds of Hashem gave me all kinds of things that I need, all my needs. But this is a bracha specifically regarding the need of wearing shoes, so it should be tzarki and not tzrachai. This is something Alter Rebbe addresses there. And all the other tzrachim have their own brachas. What other tzayrach is there? You're covering everything else. Goes through all the rest. Why does it mention Yisrael, Dafka, Noiz Yisrael, Begvura, Noita Yisrael, Besefara? Because the Alter Rebbe says those two things, even though everyone, even the Gentiles, covered their heads or wore belts, but when a Yid does it, it has a special added dimension of tznius and kedusha. The chagayr is to be mafsik ben liber la'erva, between your private parts and your heart. The hat is for gili roish, even though the Alter Rebbe says in Shulchan Aruch it's not also to walk around begili roish, but it's tznius and kedusha. So that's why you mention Yisrael in those brachas. Additional details. Then Alter Rebbe says, "Achshav bnei she'ena yadayim nekiyas," because our hands are not clean, and because the Amei Haratzos don't know them. This is harking back to a time probably when there weren't Sidurim. Not everything in Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, I would say, reflects the exact reality in his time. There's different layers. Some of it comes maybe from earlier, but the idea being that that's how it shifted into the shul, which is not our minig. In fact, our minig is to actually say it at home, but the Velt's minig is still mostly to say it in shul. Some say it out loud. You say Amen there, and it's like an interactive kind of bracha. And he brings the idea that it's not Birchas HaMitzvahs, like the Ran said. You could leave those out. You can't say it. You can say it even afterwards. Not a problem. He talks about Shlei Sani Goy, Shlei Sani Yaved, Shlei Sani Isha. He says even someone who's captive should say Shlei Sani Aved, because we're not making a bracha that I'm literally not a slave. It means I'm not a slave, an Eved Kanani who's not Mechuyev Mitzvahs. It's similar to Shalei Sani Isha. These are all Shalei Sani Goy, Shalei Sani Eved, Shalei Sani Isha are all brachas thanking Hashem that we're not in that other category that's not Mechuyev Mitzvahs. So if you're a full-fledged Jew and you're enslaved, you would still say Shalei Sani Eved. There's no connection. What about a ger? He says a ger, Yeshem, you should say Shalei Sani Ger, but not Shalei Sani Goy, because he was Hashem technically made him a Goy, etc., etc. Can't mention every detail. What did the Nashim do? The Alter Rebbe mentions that the Nashim say Shasani Kirtzainai, and in Chabad is presumably not to. It's a discussion. Then the Alter Rebbe gets into the whole, which Seder are you saying it in? And then the Alter Rebbe says, Tab Seder HaBrachas in Mechach Klum, except Matar Asurim, Zeh Kufim. Different. Obviously, in the Seder already we have a certain Seder. I believe it's based on Seder Harizal, Kavanas Harizal, why they're in the order they are in the Seder. And then Alter Rebbe mentions that there's one bracha that we haven't mentioned this entire time that we say every morning in Berachas HaShachar. What's that bracha? Hanoisin Ayoev Koyach. Wasn't mentioned in the Rambam. The Alter Rebbe says, "V'tiknu ha'go'enim achar chasimas ha'talmud." This is a post-Talmudic bracha from the Go'enim because it says Tashas Koyach Yard L'Olam. The world is a weaker place, and every morning we're impressed. Oh, we got our Koyach back. Wow, that's amazing. Let's make a bracha. It sounds like a pekadon. Usually you give a pekadon to your friend and you don't get it back in the same shape, but you give your neshama to Hashem and you get it back in great shape. Hadasha or Regua, even in better shape than you gave it to Hashem. So Go'enim made a bracha, and this is Yish B'fakbekim. Some say you shouldn't be saying a bracha that's not from before Chasimas HaTalmud. But it says, Ein b'zeh kedai litchis haminig u'takanas ha'go'enim. It's fine, we can say it. But other brachas, other made-up brachas, we shouldn't say. Therefore, he says you have to be moicha, the printers that are printing new tchinas, new bakashas, and they're throwing in Baruch Ata Hashem, Baruch Ata Hashem. You can't do that. Brachas levatala. And then he says there are others that say other brachas, semich neiflim, adbi shvalim. That's a mistake. You can't just make your own brachas up. And Alter Rebbe talks about what if you didn't hear, so yesh that you shouldn't say it, and yesh that it depends. Certain things are fundamental. So that's just a constant truth, but maybe Malbash Arumim getting dressed that you shouldn't say if you weren't Mischayev. Then the Alter Rebbe says, V'yeshayimrim, Sha'afilu in Mischayev ban Klal, Yevorach Kulin Consider on you. If you're not Chayev, you say them all in order. Because the brachas are not just for your own hana, but you're thanking Hashem that He made Tzarchi Ha'elam, and even if you're not nana, others are nana. Homnick Pasha, the Alter Rebbe says, V'ein Lashana, so that's where we come from on saying all of them. Regarding Ashiyatzar, which the Rambam mentioned in the middle, so the Kesef Mishnah mentions that some actually say you shouldn't make Ashiyatzar if you just go and to the Ketanim, and the others say yes. And if you want to learn about Ashiyatzar and Elokei Neshama, there's two Simanim and Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, some above, some in Zion. We don't have time to get into all of that. Just regarding Hiskabdu, the Rambam said you say Hiskabdu when you walk into the Beis HaKisei. So Alter Rebbe already in Siman Gimel of Madura Kama says V'achshel Nagul Amrei, because we don't consider ourselves so important that the Malachim are accompanying us. We have to tell the Malachim, it's just, don't talk to Malachim. You'll be fine.
Aleichem, though, we do say it.
Right, that's interesting. That's much later. That's actually a much later text. That's not Hiskabdu in the Gemara. Shalom Aleichem is not. But yeah,
Chabad didn't always say Shalom Aleichem, right?
I don't know
Okay.
offhand, but
We heard
it's in the
that
Siddur.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Someone said it.
No, we heard it for the first time. We didn't. It's also Chiddush.
And I think in Madura and
The Rebbe started supposedly.
Mhm.
Supposedly, who told us again?
I forgot. Frierdiker Rebbe didn't say it.
It's mentioned even in Mamarim. The Mamarim, I believe that it's from the Tzemach Tzedek that talk about the Taiching Ois. Why do we say Tzeischem L'Shalom? Is it correct to say Tzeischem L'Shalom or not? Definitely are the Chabad texts that discuss it over generations. I guess it could be though that not everyone said it. I think in Madura Basra, the later, the first few Simanim that Alter Rebbe rewrote, I think he doesn't even mention Hiskabdu. I think in those Simanim, Alter Rebbe sort of updated the Sif and only talked about things that are relevant. So he doesn't even mention Hiskabdu to say you should say it. Oh, you shouldn't say it. He just doesn't mention it at all. Now let's try to get through the rest over here. Halacha Yud. Berchas HaTorah. Amash K'mikras BaTorah. Kodim Shikra Kriyas Shema. So if you wake up in the morning and you want to learn Torah, say Torah before you say Kriyas Shema. Now this is important. Why is Rambam mentioning this before you say Kriyas Shema? Because according to the Gemara, if you said Kriyas Shema first and you said Berchas Kriyas Shema, then you said Avos Olam, that covered Berchas HaTorah. You don't have to say Berchas HaTorah because Avos Olam is all about thanking Hashem for the Torah. So Rambam is being careful in saying that if you're learning before Kriyas Shema, Ben Kara, Batayra Shabbat Ben Batayra Shabbat Peh, whichever part of Torah it is, so you wash your hands first, and you make the following three brachas, and then you learn the Torah. And this is what it is. Number 2 is that's how he ends off by both. This one and the next one. Those are the three. So here the Rambam phrased it as if you're saying good learning before Kriya Shema. But then the next halacha, the Rambam sort of says, well, this is actually what we do. The practice is that you make these three brachas, and then you read a little Torah, and then you'll say Shema a bit later. Birkas Kainim, and the minhag is that right after the brachas you say Birkas Kainim, which was our siddur as well. And the idea being that you're reading Torah right after you made the brachas on Torah. The Yesh Mekayim Shekayim Tzavos Bnei Yisrael, and some Tzavos Bnei Yisrael Marta Leim, which we also say later in Karbanas, but not in conjunction with Birkas HaTorah. The Yesh Mekayim Shekayim Shtei, and some say both. The Kainim Prakim Halachas Min Mishnah Min Abraisus, and they also say Halachas and Mishnah Braisus, which we do. We say Eludvarim from the Mishnah and Peah, and we add again from the Braisa. Now the Rebbe talks about it. I don't really have time for that. Halacha Yud Beis Psuka Dezimna B'Shibchu Chacham Marishan Mishakayim Zmirais. We say for Tilim B'Chayim Zal. They praise those who say Psuka Dezimna, what we call Psuka Dezimna. V'Hem Etil David from Ashrei Ad Sefer Sefer all the Kapitlach till Lukel B'Kadshe at the end of Tehillim. Ukvarnago Amikris Psukim L'Frei Ma'acharei. And we have the minute to say Psukim before, so we say Yichvaid and things like that, and Psukim afterwards. V'Tiknu Chacham Brach L'Fnei Hazmirais. And there's even a bracha before and after. Barak Sha'amar at the beginning, bracha l'acharei, yishtabach. So here the Rambam is mentioning all the other parts of the siddur that we already, to us it's one big tefilah, but here you're seeing the layers the Shema, the Shemona Esrei, and then the Rambam is adding that the Chachamim added the Pesukah de Zimra, the Baruch Shalom, the Yishtabach, the Achach Mevarach HaKriya Shema, the Kriya Shema, and then you get to the Shema. So the Rambam is basically telling us this is actually how we do it nowadays. Yesh Mekayim Es Yud Gimel, Shenag Lukas B'Chayim Achashim Baruch and Yishtabach Shiras Hayom. The Rambam mentions a minute of saying Oz Yashir after Yishtabach, V'achach Mevarach and Al Shema, and then you start saying Baruch Kriya Shema, Yesh Mekayim Shekayim Shiras Hazinu. Some say Hazinu in davening, Yesh Shechidim Shekayim Shtei Shiras, and some say both Shiras Hayom and Shiras Hazinu. Kokafei minig. It's all up to whatever your minig is. We say Az Yashir before Yishtabach. Aloch Yadal Meya Brachas. Chayav Adam Levarach Meya Brachas B'chol Yom and Hayom v'Halayla. Between the day and the night, you should be saying 100. And here it sounds like the cheshbon starts from the morning, going into the night. Even though in this Perek we started with the night with the Hamapto and going into the morning. But for Meya Brachas, it seems, I believe there's a discussion about it, but it seems pretty clear over here. From the day to the night. What are the 100? First of all, the 23. What are the 23? The 18 when you wake up, 3 and Berachas HaTorah, and Baruch Shem when you Yishtabach, it's 23. Then you have 7 brachas for Shema, 3 in the morning and 4 at night. So that's the bracha on tzitzis. And then you daven Shemona Esrei 3 times. So for this purpose here, he only mentions 18. He's going to mention the 19th in a minute. So you have 18 times 3. You have 86. The assumption is you're going to eat a full suda twice a day. So that gives you another 14. Sheva brachas b'chol seuda, 7 each meal. Achas k'shenetel yadav tchila until sedayim in the beginning. V'al hamazen, and you eat the actual food. Achas b'tchila amayitzilachem v'shalosh b'asayif. 3 in benching. He's going to mention in a bit that we actually say more. V'al hamayim, and if you drank water separately, the fun of l'achrav, the shahakma burn nefashis, hadei sheva times 2, 86 plus 14 is 100. That's what we got to 100. Now that we have an extra bracha in Shemona Esrei 3 times, and we have Tefilah made the 4th bracha in Berachas Hamazon twice. Nimtzu chamesh brachas Yisraelis. Now we're actually 105. What about on Shabbos and Yom Tov where you don't have 18 brachas, 19 brachas, you have 7? What if, like we said, according to the Rambam Shita, you might skip a lot of brachas in the morning if you weren't in this chayav? You didn't sleep, you didn't undo your belt and put your belt back on, you didn't go into the bathroom, etc. So then you're going to have to start making extra brachas to get to 100. How would that work? Eat a bit of a vegetable, you make a bracha before and after. Then you eat a bit of a fruit, make a bracha before and after. Another fruit, and so on in that manner until you reach 100. Shasa Yayin,
even on Shabbos,
especially on Shabbos when you don't have the 100. Shasa Yayin, you drink wine. Another 2, you keep counting as you're going. Now, it's interesting that in Nafshin and Aleph, the Rebbe actually mentioned both in Yechidus Chav Zayin Tishrei. It's interesting that the Alter Rebbe and Shulchan Aruch actually goes into the whole cheshbon as well. He doesn't just say, not everything that Alter Rebbe does, he gives the whole cheshbon. Here's the whole cheshbon. And also in the Sicha Chayesar Tafshin and Aleph, the Rebbe talks about, it's very simple, Noshim B'Taf, even Bar Mitzvah, before Bar Mitzvah, you train the same brachas, even little children. Very interesting that the Rebbe was emphasizing this as a theme at that period of time. Now just to finish, Halacha Yud Zayin. Say the Tefillah's Kachu, now the Rambam just sort of sums up the Seder of davening. When you wake up in the morning, you make these brachas. And you say Pesukah de Zimra with Baruch Shema and Yishtabach. And you say Shema with its brachas. However, according to the Rambam, you skip the Kaddish, that part of Yetzer Ur in the middle that has the Kedusha. According to the Rambam, you skip it. An individual shouldn't be saying Kedusha. I saw someone at the Rambam in the Tshuva though says that it's okay. And only in Shemona Esrei you skip the Kedusha, obviously. Only the Chazan says the Kedusha. When you say Gal Yisrael at the end of Shema, you stand up right away. You're going straight from Gula into Shemona Esrei. You daven standing. As you already learned earlier, when you conclude, it's just summing up everything we learned. You sit down, you do Tefilah Sapayim, you say whatever tachnunim you're saying, then you lift your head up, you say a few more tachnunim, right? We say or whatever. So that way you're also sitting and saying some tachnunim. One sentence, then we say Ashrei again. But then again, you say whatever you say. So according to the Rambam, it's not etched in stone. Ashrei is the last thing that Rambam mentions from Shacharis, and after that, it's whatever you say, and then you go on your way. Aleinu is not part of the calculus here at all. But Chilas, Mincha Mispal, Mas Chlikris Tila Rav Miyushav, with Mincha you start saying Ashrei sitting, but Achach Emin Mispal Tfilas Mincha you stand up for Shemin Ashrei, Shemashlim, when you finish, Nefel Panam Mischan, and again you do the Tachnunim. This is before Tachnun per se was part of the Minhag, but the Tachnunim of the Filas Apayim, like Biyareisha Yischarim, you lift your head up again and you say a little bit, you Patel Maisim and you're on your way again, no Aleinu or any of that, unless that could be included in Yischarim At. To conclude, we say Shema. It doesn't mention anything about Vurach in those psukim, but you start with Berachas Kriya Shema before and after. Similar to Tefilah, you go straight from that into davening with Spal Mu'ubin, and you're standing. Shiyashlim, when you're finished Ma'anev, Yeshiv Ma'at, to sit a little bit. Don't just run out of show. Sit a bit so there's nothing to say. But and if you actually said something, that would be even better. Earlier than I mentioned that some of the minhag to do Nefilas Apayim by Ma'arev. We said Gul at Fil, but isn't there Hashkivenu in the middle between Gal Yisrael and Shemana Esrei? It's not an interruption, but it's not an interruption, it's like long bracha.
Yeah.